Alright, in this video I'm going to finally fix the remote control my kids broke. You can see the charger input. This is the donor remote control I got. It is a Sony PlayStation 3 controller, but these are probably similar to other controllers as well. And you can see this is the one they broke. So the charging port is broken because they had a tendency to just try and jam anything in there, whether it was a USB-C, mini USB, Apple chargers. Kids will jam anything in there. So it snapped it up, and this red controller was brand new. So I want to fix the red controller, and that's why I went out and found a donor controller. Now initially I was just going to try and find the little charging port and solder a new one in, but then I kind of looked into it and I saw that the ports aren't always the same, and there's different configurations of ports and stuff like that. So I figured if I can get a used controller for between $10 and $15 off Facebook Marketplace, just get a controller and it'll have the port on it. So I'm going to take these 5 screws off and get everything out. Now this controller works, so it is weird to fix a broken controller by taking apart a working controller, but I did want to sort of test out my theory here and try it out and practice on it. So it gave me some chance to do some soldering, but I don't end up taking off the port, and I'll explain this in a second. So like I said, there's 5 screws on the back of this thing, and then it just sort of pops apart. And I'm not sure if PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 controllers are configured the same way, but I would imagine that they're all fairly similar in internal construction. But you'd have to take your own apart. And I think if you break a port like this, I would just say take the controller apart, see what's actually broken and attached, and then make a determination on how you want to fix it. I think I could have got a much more broken controller to fix this with, say one that had the sticks broken or the top buttons or something like that broken. As long as the circuit board's good to go, I think this fix that I do here will work. So you can see there's a circuit board in each one of them, and attached to the circuit board is a battery, which is just plug and play, and then there's 2 wires on each side, and those operate the little motors that cause the remote to shake when it's doing stuff. The little circuit board is not physically attached to the remote control. It just sort of goes in there by pressure. So there's little clips on each side, and you take those off, and that'll let you pull this circuit board back. So you can see that circuit board is not physically connected to the remote. All those pins on those ribbon strips that are on the remote still, those just get pressed against the circuit board and held in place by plastic clips on each side. So yes, I could remove that charging port by removing the soldering on each of the 4 corners, and I do that at the end, but it's actually going to be way easier to just remove the wires that are on the side and put the circuit board from the black controller into the red controller. Now the black controller that I just bought, and I only paid $15 Canadian for it, is slightly different than the circuit board in the red controller. So I actually take my other black controller, and that's the one which I also got secondhand for $15, and I put that one in. So you can see on the red one there's a little additional piece that's sticking off it, whereas the other black one doesn't have that. But I do try all the circuit boards in the red controller, and both work regardless of this whatever this thing sticking off it is. So it doesn't really matter if it has that thing sticking off or it doesn't. The circuit board works in all the controllers. It's not an issue. To remove the circuit board from the controller, all I do is heat up a small soldering iron and just tap that little piece of solder. There's not much holding these things on. It doesn't take more than about 2 or 3 seconds, just a couple little taps, and then those little wires come off. So I don't add flux and I don't add solder, nothing like that to remove these. Just a couple taps, softens up the solder, and the wire just kind of pops right off. See, that black one came off very quickly, and then that one comes off quickly as well. So that's what I did instead of removing the charging port. And obviously the battery's still connected. You do need to be careful when you're soldering around batteries. You don't want to heat up the battery because it could explode. So be very careful with that. It's probably better to remove the battery from the circuit board, but I did not do that. So for the black donor remote control, same deal getting it off. Just a little tap on the red wire, little tap on the black wire. I don't know why I didn't get a good camera angle here, but they come off right away, no problem. And then here's the worst camera angle of all, but 2 taps and that circuit board comes off as well. Now soldering the new circuit board onto my red controller, and like I said, I'm doing this because this red controller was brand new, had it for a couple of days. A few years ago, kids instantly broke it, so I know it's in good condition. It just has a bad charging port. But technically, yes, I could have just used the black controller as a new controller and thrown this red controller in the garbage, but then I wouldn't be able to make a video about this. So soldering them on, very easy. Obviously you want the black wire and red wire in the same configuration as before. If you get it backwards, I would assume that the motor would just spin in the reverse direction, but I'm gonna get them in the correct orientation. So just hold the wire in place, couple taps on the chunk of solder that's already there to heat it up, and then the wire will sink right into it. And really the only thing I'm trying to make sure of is that I don't overheat the solder so it spills over and touches the other piece of solder. So just keep the solder separate, keep the wires separate, and that's it. That controller is hooked up. So now this circuit board just needs to snap into place. It's a very tight channel that the little circuit board snaps into, and it's going to line right up with those pins that are the sensors for the rest of the controller. And then the little battery pack also has cutouts, and it clips into place too so that the battery's not flopping around in your controller. Just like that, easy peasy. So when I hit the little PlayStation button, the controller starts flashing, and then I'll just plug it into the PlayStation. And there you go, there's how the little DualShock action thing works. So there's a little fast spinning one, and then there's the other one on the right, which is a slow spinning one. So putting this back together, you do need to make sure that the left and right trigger buttons on the top are lined up, but other than that, it just pretty much snaps into place without too much effort. And then the last thing to do is to put the 5 screws into the controller. So if you have a broken PlayStation controller, especially if it's the charging port, something like that, I would take it apart and get a good look at what the actual issue is, because you might be able to get a donor controller off Facebook Marketplace that you could just retrofit like I just did with no issues. And you can see that this would be harder to take off than those little side wires, because there's the 4 corners that need to come off, and then there's all the pins that also need to line up, and those are all soldered on individually. So it was much more difficult to get that little charger off than it was just to get the 2 wires off the sides, for sure. So if you could avoid doing that, I would, and I would just use the circuit board instead of worrying about going to buy a charging port separately. And then just trying out the controller with a random Call of Duty game that was in the PlayStation, just make sure everything works. And it works perfectly. There was no issues swapping the 2 little circuit boards. And then the DualShock feature is obviously working. So every button works well, everything works good with the controller now. And now armed with this new knowledge of PlayStation controller inner configurations, I am prepared to repair other controllers in the future. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.